Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight's discussion is our third edition of the Burning Issues. You may have seen the first edition of the Burning Issues. We, the resident panelists on The Square, talk about things that on social media you have raised. So you basically post and tweet and we discuss. Tonight we're going to focus on a couple of things. First amongst them is economic crimes and high fraud. We're going to talk about the thousands of students that were scammed at a conference organized by Wealth for Fitness. This was last month. Late last month. We'll also talk about different biases from the West that were challenged and that led to a hashtag, Who Are You? We'll also talk about the launch of the AFCFTA that happened last week. My name is Dana Mpisi. I'm the host of the show, of The Square. I'm very happy to be joined by the rest of the panelists. No guests tonight, just the four of us. Yeah. And I'll start with Charles Haba. Good to have you.
Same here, Dana. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Bernard Namata, great to have you as always. And Ephraim Omendi, great to have you.
Thank you for having me, Dave.
I miss sitting next to you.
I know, it's been a while.
It's been a while. So before we begin, like we usually do, we're just going to touch upon issues that have caught our attention during the week, midweek recap. Charles, I'll start with you.
I think Bana and I have agreed that she goes first.
My best view on taxation. This week we had a proposal from the Ministry of Finance to...
I saw your tweets.
Yes.
Explain yourself.
Yes. We have a proposal from the Ministry of Finance to reduce tax on wines and beers locally made to sort of boost local production.
With local ingredients.
Yes, yes. And I can understand where that is coming from, because even as we talk about the CFTA, what will be critical will be the local component when it comes to, for it to qualify as a product made in a country. So I understand part of the drive, and boosting production incomes for farmers. But on the other hand, one thing I'm asking myself, one, are we also investing in rehab centers? You know, that's one.
Rehab centers because of the high consumption of alcohol, you assume.
Yes, because if there's an incentive for beer and wines, I think we should also start thinking about rehabs. And as far as I know, at the moment, we don't have enough. That's one. And two...
That's a good point, though.
Two, in terms of priorities, I think that the priority has to be around supporting people who cannot afford some of the basics or essentials. And as usual, I'm campaigning for sanitary pads because for wines and beer, people will buy them anyway, at whatever cost. Yeah. But, I mean, for sanitary pads, we have many young women and girls who cannot afford them and will miss school because of that. So in terms of priority, I have a problem. But that's, you know.
I totally agree with you, but I mean, everything I think can be explained in, you know,
absolutely.
At the end of the day. But I also just like to commend you, Brennan, because on The Square, you constantly and consistently talk about sanitary pads and zero taxes on these things to you know, empower girls. Charles?
A little bit related to what Bana is saying, but on the consumption side of things, mildly related. So from the 15th of June, a series of businessmen who are in the business of operating liquor stores or trading in wines and liquors were being rounded up. I'm reliably informed that the operation was being run by the Revenue Protection Department of Rwanda Revenue Authority. Now, this group of people have been arrested and have been kept somewhere for close to 3 weeks now without legal redress. They are suspected for being fraudsters. But my biggest issue was not really the reason for which they were arrested, but for you to hold this number of businessmen and have their businesses locked up for 3 weeks, plus more than that, and they without trial. I think as far as our democratic and justice process is concerned, that's a step in the wrong direction. Yeah.
Interesting. And what were the reasons again? Do you know?
I am told that they are suspected they were arrested for being suspects in dealing with fraudulent beverages. I was told also that there's also some of them are suspected to have forged the RRA seals. Yeah, so
There's a big things
of
to be
course,
accused of.
they're very, very big accusations to be made.
But they can be settled commercially.
Yeah, but even that, you know, it's a commercial offense. I mean, or it could be criminal if you actually, it is criminal to be fraudulent. But the bigger issue there is, you know, to be held. I would imagine it's only terrorists who are held for weeks, several weeks without trial, even before appearing before a court of law. Yeah.
Interesting. Your midweek highlight?
Let me pick from the international sphere or scene. Donald Trump and the UK. It's really interesting to see how foreign politics and diplomacy is at play. I think it's almost. I think I find it comical on my side, and I think we're going to talk about it in relation to who are you. You know, I think you find the situation where the West has its own issues that it's dealing with, and instead you find people want to shift focus and continue the old narrative of Africa has its problems. But I feel like, so the case with Donald Trump and the foreign office in the ambassador in the UK was, I think he threw in stupidity, foolish. It was almost
sensitive.
Yeah, like it was almost it was like talking about like something very. It was very demeaning in terms of the language, and this is not language you expect from a diplomat.
But he resigned.
Yeah, no, he resigned. It's understandable. But now what happened is the president of the United States of America, Mr. Donald Trump, who should have remained regal, who should have probably even just ignored it, and allow the people that be the Secretary of State and so on to sort it out amongst themselves. He took to Twitter and he then launched an attack as well. So then the question is, it's almost like it's the kettle calling the pot black. You know, it's almost like he stooped to that level, and then he ended up. I don't know what he was planning to achieve with that. So it was a bit comical. I think for the most part. Brenda seems to listen to comical.
Yeah. I just feel like. First of all, diplomats work like that. That's why it's diplomacy. So there's always the official side of things, and then the real, you know, that's how diplomats work. So for me, I wouldn't be surprised that that note was in existence, you know. But perhaps the problem is,
the leak.
The leak. But
it happens.
That's how diplomats operate, and that's why, you know, they will tell you, you want the official side or.
So what would Trump's tweets, the official or the unofficial?
No, I think that's
uncategorizable.
I don't think you can categorize those.
Trump is in the zone.
But I think at the same time, it's difficult to be very shocked by President Trump's statements sometimes. And
I think
he's just being himself.
I think it's amusing at this point.
Yeah.
For me, my weekly, like I said, I don't really give weekly recaps because I'd rather we dive into things. But I just wanted to highlight this initiative. It's an East African competition for women only, women entrepreneurs. They've been visiting different parts of East Africa. It's called Invest to Impact. You can actually find the information on www.investtoimpact.africa. Invest to is the number 2.
Oh, okay.
And it's fantastic. They have different categories. And it's not just a competition where they give you money. There's a whole process. I think it kicks off next week. And then, you know, until sometime in September. But there's mentorship and everything else for women-based entrepreneurs. There's a couple of, categories. You have to have a minimum of, let's say, you have been in business for between a number of years. You have to have a certain number of employees, minimum, I think 3 or 5, and so forth and so on. And the categories of the competition are people who, you know, there's part of the competition, the people, well, who win the competition being awarded financially until up to $3 million.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
And only for
I
women.
wish you the best of luck. If
I don't think I have a turnover to be able to.
It's fine. We
you
can make
don't
you a partner. We
qualify.
can make you a partner in our business.
Not yet. It has to be women-owned, 51%. But the categories, 3 million, 50,000, and so forth and so on.
But there's an opportunity there for mergers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
As long
Prior
as,
to the competition.
Yeah.
Yes.
as long as it's 51% woman-owned.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what you have to
And
have a
who's funding
turnover of
it?
at least.
So there are different categories. I don't have the details at hand, but there are different categories where there's one that's to accelerate. That's the one that, at least $3 million, and then there are different categories. And I think the last one that doesn't really involve money is to do with just networking you. So flying you to different parts of the globe you can propel your business just meeting with these and networking with these.
Who's funding this?
It's a couple of people, organizations. There's FinDev Canada, there's CDC.
Also, it's not Africans.
I don't know about the people who are African in terms of funding, but I'm sure it's there. But Mama Graça Machel is also at the forefront of this initiative. I think you'll be seeing more in Rwanda. And it's 25 women entrepreneurs from not all, but most countries in East Africa.
Oh, wow.
So to those who are watching, visit invest.
To impact.
Yes.
Africa.
Africa. Yeah. Exactly. Oh. Invest to impact.africa. Yeah. So let's take a deep dive into the conversations today. We're going to try and make it short and sweet with all our points because we have a lot of Twitter. We'll have a lot of social media coming back to us. So the first is to do with a scam that involved numbers range. Some people say 2,000 youth, some say 6,000 youth. But thousands of youth on June 25th was scammed to a scheduled conference. And we all know that this conference was called the Money, Business and Wealth Conference happening at the Kigali Convention Center. So apparently many misunderstood the event, whereby a course that was supposed to be given at the end of the event was to a value of $197. But most youth flocked to the event thinking they were going to get, $197, which didn't happen. So I know there's been a lot of discourse on social media, how just by phone, from a security perspective, how is 6,000, whatever the number is, there's no corroborating figure, but thousands of youth were convened via SMS, via text. From a security perspective, what does that say? And then the second, what does it say about our mentality of Rwandan youth today with this get-rich-quick sort of thing, these freebies. So on those two things, I'd like us to just quickly dissect it before we go to our next part of the conversation. And Ephraim, because you're a young entrepreneur, you work hard for your gains. What's your take on this?
No. Okay. How do I? One, let me start with. I feel like we're assigning blame where blame is not supposed to
There's
be.
no blame. We're just trying to understand what happened.
I'm coming to my point.
No one is judging right now.
No, I'm coming to my point. So one, we're calling it a scam. So we're shifting blame onto the organizers, saying that they took advantage of, which is not necessarily the case. There was a huge, from what I saw, there was a huge misunderstanding that came from the side of the people who wanted the attendees, from how they interpreted that message.
But I think it was on purpose. It was purposely not very clearly put forward by the organizers. There was a lot of room left to miss. But you
do know they sent the email. They sent an email. I think because when they realized that there was a WhatsApp message that was going around that was saying almost you're going to get, because somebody rewrote a message saying, hey, you should go to convention, you're going to get $197. And then they started to distribute it. When they realized that, I think 2 or 3 days before the conference, they wrote an email to all the people who had.
I saw that email.
Now, the question then is, why didn't people actually look at that and say, okay? And they did the job to try to clarify when they realized that it had gone beyond. And I think there was that aspect of comprehension. So calling it a scam assigns blame to the organizers that they were the ones who set out to do something malicious, which was not the case. Then now let's talk about the youth. You talked about the youth of today.
But just very quickly, I want to take you back to that.
Actually charged in court, eh?
Yeah, and not only that, maybe saying we'll give you $197, that was an issue, right? And it maybe not necessarily be the fault of the organizers because, people willfully made it a point to just look at the money and say, this is what they mean. But the point is, when D-Day came, they were nowhere to be seen. What do you have to say about that?
No, but there were organizers on the... So let me give you a simple example.
No.
Mention the name. For the longest, they have a list of speakers. For the longest, people thought that those speakers were physically going to show up. What would happen normally is that guys would project these people. They would still be talking live, but it would be video conferencing in from somewhere. That was what was going to happen at this particular. Now I'm saying this, I don't know the organizers. I don't know who they were. I don't know. What I know is, from what I saw, this is the typical practice in this area. Unfortunately, it snowballed at a point and became something else. And that's what I'm trying to say, that the organizers were not maliciously looking to swindle anybody. They were not trying to get the double up on somebody. This is the common practice when it comes to world conferences and one. The talker, he conferences in, and normally it's actually even almost like a franchise. So guys will say, I want to bring this brand of wealth, whatever, into Rwanda. So they contact the people. Then they get the rights to do it. Then they're told, okay, for every ticket you get, you take 50% as an example. Now, there were people who were arrested on site. Some of the what we consider the local organizers. But now I want to come back to this point of the get-rich-quick mentality that people think youth have. Do you know that every generation, when they were young, thought the same way? Do you know what actually, and this is why I keep feeling like when people say the youth of today, it's like, guys, when you were young, what you also would go after an opportunity if you thought it was going to happen quickly. It's normally our mentality towards understanding that life takes time comes from maturity, because we have seen that nothing comes quickly. Now, these are young people. You tell a young person, and actually I find it enterprising. We shouldn't actually discard it. No, I'm being very serious. I'll take, for example, the guy who... No, let me explain. I'll take the example, the guy who sold his harvest. I think it was from Rusizi, or was one of the two.
His entire harvest to come for this conference.
He sold his harvest and borrowed money. I thought that's actually somebody you need to take.
Shrewd.
Nurture. Exactly. This is somebody who understood, let me see what resources I have. So he did the first thing of any business person, a resource audit. He weighed the cost and benefit. He's like, he didn't fully understand and comprehend the 197. He came. But he took that, did the cost benefit analysis, said, this is a better deal. And he took that risk. That is something to commend and nurture in the youth, not to beat them up for and say, no, you made a mistake. And I think now when it comes to this thing of assigning blame, I think what I would want to talk about more than anything is saying, okay, we know our demographic, we know our economic dividend, and on the basis that most of our population is young. Most of these people are coming to the job market. Unfortunately, we are not creating as much job opportunities. Private sector, public sector, everybody is responsible for this. We are not doing enough to accommodate these people. What can we do better? So like in a situation where you have a young man who's enterprising like that, that person can actually start a business and make money. He already has that
willing to take that calculated risk.
Exactly. And I think that's stuff that we should, I think instead of us saying, this is a scam, young people have a get-rich-quick mentality, I think the question should be is, okay, what lessons did we learn about this in terms of how do we engage the youth and actually plug into that resource and that energy to actually move the country forward?
I just want to take it over from the entrepreneurship point of view, and I think if you're to, I'm going to make a wild guess that probably 85% of those who are scammed, and I'll insist that they were scammed, because they made it at this point it is irrelevant of who scammed them. It is about the victims. I would make a wild guess and say about 85% of them were going to use that money in a meaningful way. Maybe the other 15 would have left it in Cocoa Bean and the other places as close to the convention center as possible. Yeah. But so that therefore tells you what? That people have ideas, but they're looking for opportunities in which to put those ideas into implementation. And I'll agree with you to that extent. But however, I think that the bigger point, I'll just take it away from the youth and blame them a little bit. It just shows you that how vulnerable people are. And I guarantee you that that's not the first, and neither is it the last scandal like that to happen, because we're extremely vulnerable. If you look at even more sophisticated people who come and promise to build houses, and take people's deposits. And of course, if you've taken out a leasing product, you're going to have the original of the logbook with the bank. Yeah. Some of them are very clever that they go do color copies of the logbook, print them out in hard copy, and then sell them on to unsuspecting buyers. So we have to be very, very awake. Back to my story of the week that I began with I'm told there are close to 30 people, 30 vendors who are arrested in this scandal of the wines and liquor dealers. Some of them were very unsuspecting, I am told. Because
they were duped.
Yeah, they were duped to believe that the seal of Rwanda Revenue that was on the bottle was actually genuine. And they, as far as they are concerned, they bought genuine products. So we are very vulnerable, and this comes out.
But do you think this naivete, this sense of naivete, is it just common to us as Rwandan people? Are we just very?
I think that's a very good one you bring up.
I don't think we pull this stuff in
generally speaking,
right?
we are very trustworthy as Rwandans, and that unsuspecting attitude that we have makes us very vulnerable to being duped. Yes.
No, coming back to that.
But first, I need Brendan to also say something, because we need to rush through this. You know how it is with this Burning Issues edition.
I have a different perspective. One, I think what happened really brought to bear what it means in terms of misinformation and the need to counter misinformation and the increasing role of social media, because it was so easy to mobilize using social media, these networks, informal networks. And in terms of misinformation, the issue that you raise, misreading or someone else writing the same message, and you're getting the fake message.
But even the spelling of Radisson Blue, that should and what I'm saying is that should we should have the comprehension, we should elevate, like young people still lack that ability to notice something and be like, this message is being misspelled.
Yeah, but you see, that speaks to the quality of our education, which is the other point I wanted to raise in terms of, the graduates, because most of them were just young people, most likely young graduates, unemployed young graduates, who have gotten out of university without the critical skills. So the text, they will probably look at the text and perhaps someone who just also, the gaps within our education system in terms of critical thinking. The other element, I think, for security.
I want us to touch a bit on security. Yes,
security, I think that it is very easy to mobilize young people within a very short time.
With misinformation.
Misinformation.
It's actually quite scary.
Yeah, it's scary. And also, I mean, we are still in the Liberation Week. Our generation, the kind of wars that we're talking about, this gives us a clear sense of what we should expect. Because, within a week or so, you have so many young people in one place. And that's, a problem. How you counter that? I mean, these people have to be busy somewhere so that they don't spend a lot of time on their phones, So again, to what we're talking about, unemployment, it's a big issue. As long as you have high unemployment among young people, I think no matter what you do, there'll always be a big risk, yes, and it's really a big threat to our security.
I'd like us to go to a Twitter feed, if we can go to a Twitter feed, because one of the things
that comes up, I want to bring to Bana's attention that very many of those people, I'm told, of the youth who, and some of them are not exactly youth, were actually employed. Some asked for day offs from their places of work to go and get $197.
Which also says another thing about quality, quality of jobs.
Yes,
because you see, we go out and we say, we want to create employment, and as an employer,
but this is what we call dignified employment.
Exactly.
There's actually a term for it in government speak.
No, it's the desire is, can we have, even if we're creating jobs, can we have jobs that are, again, dignified?
I'd like us to go to a Twitter feed, because I'd like us to tweet per topic as we finish this, the high economic crimes that are happening in the country. We have a tweet that is here, and this tweet is from Alex Mugabo, and he says, From a positive perspective, the conference scamming fortuitously provided free information to policymakers that the youth are yearning to grab opportunities no matter what the risks are involved. This kind of echoes what you're saying. Notwithstanding the vulnerability to scamming, the youth sent a crystal clear message.
Yep.
The next tweet, he's quite spot on with that. And then his next tweet, he goes on to say that without doubt, one of the main hallmarks of the 21st century has been the IT revolution. Bernard, this is what you keep on alluding to, including last week's show. However, we will enjoy its benefits at a cost. The youth conference scam demonstrated one of the social costs of IT and exposed how vulnerable our country can be if we're not ahead of the game.
Yeah. Now, I read somewhere today about something Facebook started some time back. So they have a system to keep track of misinformation around the social network across all platforms, even on the encrypted messages on WhatsApp. So messages like, okay,
you're doing PR for Facebook.
Like no, I mean, no, but I'm just trying to say, like, again, it's their platform. WhatsApp is their platform. And if the owners of the platform are doing that, I mean, if the manufacturer of a car says you need to put oil, and they're putting oil in their own car, you obviously have to put oil in yours. So the idea is that and I think this is now where we start to look at how advanced and sophisticated our institutions are to tackle this challenge. But for example, like RIB, like, do they have a department that specifically covers at least what they can monitor? Stuff like Facebook. I know, and I'm assuming it's extremely tough.
But you
that's
know,
for another day.
We've had the Rwanda Investigative Bureau on the Square before, and if you remember, I think it was episode 25, and we talked about economic crimes in terms of, especially in the financial sector, cyber crime and so forth and so on. So they actually have departments that are tasked with looking at crimes, fraud from an IT perspective. I don't know, equivalent to the Facebook thing?
So what I'm saying is, I'm not looking at necessarily fraud where guys are hacking systems and carrying out financial crimes online. I'm looking at stuff like where there's just misinformation.
Yeah, misinformation.
Where it starts to, I remember there was somebody who tweeted something and RIB actually replied to that tweet. It was, I forgot what it was, and said that's not true.
But
And I think for me, what I'm saying is that there's an absolute need to manage.
In the U.S. Senate over, our governments in Africa are yet to pile pressure on these giants, So it's difficult, yes, to be more responsible. And if you ask me, I think the response has to come from Africa, especially because we are on the receiving end of these platforms, to be able to, again, part of the CFTA that we'll be talking about, pile pressure on these giants, because we've seen them being fined by the European Union. We haven't seen that happen in Africa.
From an African perspective?
Yes, from an African perspective.
I agree.
Yeah.
Moving on swiftly, we're going to go into Western bias, Western media bias, and the hashtag, who are you? So we all know, and Brenna, I'd like to posit this to you first, as a journalist, as a media practitioner. And so we know that in an interview with France 24 last month, the European Development Days, His Excellency President Kagame questioned a journalist from France 24 on the complex many countries in the West harbor of pushing a derogatory stereotype of Africans as human rights violators and the West as the custodians of human rights. So we've heard this narrative since time immemorial. And as Charles likes to say, being pushed until the cows come
back home.
So this question, His Excellency asked this France 24 journalist last month at this development conference in Europe, created a hashtag, who are you? We all know the hashtag, who are you? And it went viral on social media. And it had a lot of angles. There are people who, majority from what I saw, supported it. It united a lot of Africans to come together and collectively start, adding to the hashtag. Other people were also, more or less divided against it. I have friends who called in and said, but yeah, you see, I think the point was missed, so forth and so on. So I think there was sort of polar opposites across the bridge. But I'd like to ask you as a media practitioner, Berna, what is your take on this, and how do you think this narrative can be changed?
I thought you were going to ask her, who are you?
Good question.
Do you come across this narrative often? I don't know if you're at liberty to say, but how do you think we can also change it?
First of all, I went back at the clip and looked at it, and I had an issue, first of all, with the way it all began, because this lady decides to introduce the commissioner before the head of state. Now, already for me,
total disregard for protocol.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
that would never
So you
been
could
done
see
by a different head of state if they're non-African.
Yeah. I mean, nobody does that. Nobody does that. They cannot do that if
it was Trump.
if it was Trump or who,
Even some,
Yeah.
no offense to the presidents from those smaller Eastern European countries, but it could be like the
So-
president from Poland.
So already you could see the patronizing attitude, in my view. Secondly, I think that now media bias is a huge topic. There are series of reports, dissertations, PhDs on this issue. You know, Western media coverage of
Africa.
Yeah, of Africa, and whether the narrative has changed. Most recently, you know, with the Africa Rising, with the famous Economist front page story. You're familiar with that? The Economist saying, you know, the hopeless continent,
Yes,
and then,
yes,
you know,
yes.
yeah. And so
Sometime back,
this is not new, yeah. But I wouldn't want to focus so much on them. I want to focus on what we can do on our side. One, I feel that we give them so much importance that we create a space for them to abuse us, okay? Because if I was the one in charge, I just don't allow anybody to interview the head of state just because they're, I mean, the lady in question is the European editor, okay? So France 24 doesn't have an African editor. So in the beginning, I don't give them that opportunity, because quite often what we see is that press officers like to prioritize foreign media in terms of coverage. It is an issue. So we give them room to abuse us. Now, you can understand and you can argue that, you know, we are looking at influence. If it's the BBC, it's more influential than the New Times. But how do we build the New Times to be
to that level?
You know, yeah, to be as influential as the BBC? That is the inconvenient discussion that we need to have, which goes back to empowering local journalism. I think we have to invest. You will not control what France 24 or BBC does, you know, or how they treat you have no control. But if you invest in local journalism and it becomes influential, then you don't need BBC, because you can produce relevant, good content that will still be, because journalism is about influence. It doesn't matter how much you churn out. As long as it's not influential, there's no point. And I think the reason why we see foreign media take a lead is because their coverage most of the time is influential.
They have bigger influence.
Yes, they have bigger influence. So for me, I'm looking at it in terms of what we can do. And I think the beginning part has to be empowering local journalists. Give them a chance to make mistakes, you know. Because if that was a local journalist, I don't know what would have happened to them, you know. But clearly you could tell that
from the onset,
the journalist, the editor had no understanding of Rwanda at all.
Absolutely none. The
She had no
questions that were
understanding.
asked,
Yes,
zero
she
context.
couldn't do any follow-up,
Yes.
because she simply had an
A
outline.
list, yes.
Yeah, and she was just trying to rush through a discussion about how do we empower local journalism, you know, to get to a level where it is influential.
I really like how you've said, let's not focus too much on the West, these media houses and their biases and so forth and so on, but let's actually look inward. You know, let's look inward and develop and build our structures and systems when it comes to like the media to avoid this dependence that's often biased. It's high time we stop doing this.
I think. So I posted a Twitter thread around my sentiments.
I saw it too.
And it's in line with what she says.
Yes.
You know, and I think that's what His Excellency was also trying to say. You know, and I like the words he used. He was like, the human rights you talk of are our rights. They are ours. And I think for me, the belief always when I looked at the "Who are you" hashtag, it was about how much value do we ascribe to ourselves, like and people can dislike me for my opinions on this, but I'm like, the way we treat ourselves is, we empower these people to treat us that way. You know, in the sense that you find a situation where we don't ascribe value to local investors. So why should a foreign investor value what we bring? When foreign media covers foreign African business owners, they're not going to hold us in high regard. When we go to sit with our foreign counterparts and on the table,
this translates across the board,
and
to media, to everything across the board.
We know this very well. There was that story in neighboring Uganda of that lady who came who didn't have any medical experience and was and children
she
died at her hands.
100 children.
And why did we allow that?
Because she was a Muzungu.
Exactly my point. And this reverse racism is a big problem, and it is where this "who are you" stems from, and it really upsets me because I sit there and I look at people and I'm like, you would rather foster the agenda of a foreign entity, and that is probably looking to has an agenda, is looking to exploit you, and at the detriment of your local brother, of your people. And then what kills me is that those same people are the ones who were so excited to share the video. I'm like, you guys have missed the point. You guys should be embarrassed to share this video because you guys are the ones that he is talking about. You guys are the enablers of this Western savior culture that continues to plague us. So what I've seen is I can't change what people think about me. But what I can do is I can change the value I ascribe to myself, and the value I ascribe to Diana, and the value I ascribe to our own media that covers them very well. They have their own business institutions that value the local investors. So what ends up happening is you have equal the level playing field, and we can get better deals.
But it starts from within.
Yeah.
It starts from
That's what you're both saying.
Exactly. So when I'll take, for example, even just look at the deals we structure with foreign entities. When either government gets into a PPP or we get into a partnership, some of them really bad deals. Why? Because we continue to perpetuate this belief that they're doing us a favor. No. Investment, do you know what the returns on international capital is right now? Like when you look at US government bonds, ridiculously low, 1%. African knows they're going to make 10%. They're like, hey, it's a good deal. So you're doing them a favor. So instead of going and almost begging for the investment, tell them, look, you can either invest or you don't. Pick. And once we start to ascribe that value to ourselves, we will get the value, we'll get the respect we deserve.
Yeah, I think I want to really underscore the issue, the point around it all begins with us. And now I will simplify it to the extent that if we look at the four of us and look at when there's a big scandal, like maybe the youth being scammed, or even something that's more life-threatening, give an example of the Dusit attacks that were in neighboring Kenya, or for that matter, Westgate, or anything. I'll just pick one small example of the number of exaggerated stories that will go around that particular incident, and we will all be more than happy to forward them as they are on face value. Take it a notch higher and look at a scandal that will be here, say, around a celebrity or a socialite like Shadibu or whoever. And how many times do we ourselves take time to first analyze and say, before I share this with all other people, am I sure that it is the right thing? The Radisson Blue that you're just going to forward with the E at the end, So what is your role individually in ensuring that you make a change, that you're not like any other person? And I believe that's where it should all begin, this who you are campaign. What difference are you making individually in your own post, in your comfort where you're seated? Yeah. The four of us have an opportunity to be speaking to millions of Rwandans every Wednesday. What difference are we making in perceptions that are out there? The number of the viewers that watch RTV are all over the world. They're not only Rwandans. How are we using this platform to ensure that we influence the narrative of people out there? We belong to WhatsApp groups of people who went to school from all over East Africa. And sometimes I take on my schoolmates, both primary and secondary level. how some of them have never said one single good thing about their country. I'm wondering,
Maybe
for crying
there's
out
no-
loud, you're eating, you're growing, your family, your financial status, your economic status is growing. How can you say from morning to evening, January to January, that everything is bad?
Glory is to God.
Yeah? So,
Glory is to God.
But Charles,
yeah,
I
the
really
point-
like how
yes.
you, well, from beginning to where it's turned now is that the whole "who are you"
Yes.
viral hashtag was really questioning, who are you to be? What started out as a developmental conversation turning into human rights. So again, that editor, not briefed, no context, wrong person for the job, but also it turned from, His Excellency questioning this sort of complexes, superior complexes and biases from the West. Just right now in this conversation, you guys have kind of changed it into who are you as an individual who can actually do something from your country, for your continent, to change this sort of narrative.
Exactly.
So I really like that twist that you guys have
Yeah.
sort of brought to the table. But you're about to conclude? Or
I think this is really the point. That just by way of summarizing it very quickly, it all begins with all of us individually. Do whatever you can within your space, within the means that the Lord has provided you, to change the narrative. Yes.
Absolutely. And on that note, we're going to go to the next part the last part, actually, of the conversation, which is the launch of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which took place on July 7th at the 12th Extraordinary Summit at the African Union in Niamey, Niger. So trading under the AFCFTA is going to commence in July 2020, July 1st. And I know we've discussed the AFCFTA on the square numerous times. But my question is quite general. I remember when we started the square in April, it was the first time they were convening in Kigali in May, around that time. And very soon after, we've had numerous conversations on this and the ratification process and so forth and so on. We are actually set to commence operations around this time next year. So my question to you is basically, do you think we're finally at the precipice of an economic game changer for the continent?
Most definitely.
And I know we've been equal halves pessimistic and equal halves optimistic on the show.
So
Are we almost there? Are we just at the tip of...
So now you have to understand that AFCFTA, like all these other things that have happened in the past, are catalytic. They're not, it's not in itself, it's not an end. It's a means to an end. So for example, let me tell you what is now happening in West Africa. ECOWAS currency, a singular currency. And I have talked about this and sang the song like, actually there was a time when I was even on another show and I said it, and I almost sounded like I was crazy. There were some bankers from South Africa who was on the line. I think there were some guys from Kenya and West Africa. And I sounded like an idealist, intellectual, just spewing content of a thesis. I said, the biggest challenge, hindrance, is currency. Our trade currency. And it's understandable when you talk of oil because the global standard, the oil standard is it's USD. Now, when it comes to selling potatoes across the border between here and there, why should I pay in dollars? Why should I go look for? And you think that in Rwanda, at least we're very fortunate that the people at the central bank and our economists at Minecofin have really thought about how to make sure that our economy has that stability. So we don't have really tough exchange control. So if I want dollars to trade, I can go get dollars to trade. But there are countries on the African continent where people cannot simply sell their products or buy products because there is no forex to buy it. So once you develop a trade currency, just the trade, you don't even have to your internal monetary policies can remain the same and intact. Just that, and this is now where we talk of cryptocurrencies and Libra. It doesn't have to be electronic, but it's just saying there's a different currency of buying goods across borders. And that's what I think AFCFTA I'm just giving this as a simple example, but it's gonna catalyze a lot of things that should have happened in the past. Because what's gonna happen is guys are gonna be like, okay, now we have this trade block and we've ratified it. What do we need to do to make it happen? So ECOWAS looked at the currency and are like, okay, we need a trade currency. Or we need a currency, joint currency that we're in control of, so at least we have control over how we trade goods amongst ourselves. I know something within East Africa is gonna come up. The same thing in SADC, and then even now when you look at COMESA, as a whole. So I'm confident that people's lives are going to change significantly. And it may not be immediate, but you know, it's kind of like a gradual growth. You know, you don't notice it, but by the time you look back on your life, let's say 20 years from now, you're like,
it's actually tangible.
yeah, you're like,
you can feel
where we are today is because of that decision, and we're going to see it.
Berna?
I'm excited and very optimistic. I think
weren't you
cautiously
the usual pessimist? No?
Cautiously.
Whenever we talk about it, aren't you the one who's pessimistic?
Yes,
yes.
Cautiously optimistic.
What has changed?
What has changed
Nigeria
is
ratified.
Nigeria?
Yes, not just Nigeria. I think over time, and thanks to a lot of lobbying that has been going on behind the scenes, we're getting some positive moves. And I mean, with the countries signing up. And the pessimist in me wants to, like, what were you waiting for anyway? But thank God, we finally have it. But I think one of the thorny issues will remain around the rules of origin, because that is what determines what is preferential. Yeah. And now why that is a big issue is, on one hand, the CFTA could unlock industrialization, you know, on the continent, which is a big problem because we are still a net importer, even of basic items. There is potential there to drive industrialization. But the issue is going to be, how do you determine, for instance, that this mug is actually made in Rwanda or made in Africa? Because now we'll be talking about made in Africa. Now, the issue is, if you have a Chinese company come to Rwanda and set up to manufacture these mugs and bring in maybe 80%, you can expect issues around whether it qualifies to be
from Rwanda.
Yes, to be, you know. So, rules of origin are going to be a problem, and the only way of resolving that is investing more in terms of increasing local content. For whatever you manufacture, local content has to go up.
Local industry.
Yes, the local content, if it's a mug like this, at least, I'm not sure of the percentage. East Africa has started with 35%, I think, but eventually. So, I think rules of origin will be a big issue. There's also a risk that I'm concerned around dumping, you know, of cheap items. That is a problem. You may have countries that are maybe producing lots of items or may import. So there's an issue of dumping, how that, again, is enforced. How you minimize that is an issue. But I think overall, it all depends on the political will. Because if the politicians sit and agree on these things, implementation will happen. And I think going forward, the technicians have done their bit. We have a document, but moving the talk. In East Africa, we have learned the hard way. You know, I mean, East Africa for a very long time has been advanced in terms of regional integration, trade. We already have, you know, a functioning customs union. But we've seen that, you know, due to the political environment, it's become difficult, you know.
To actually enforce this, the integration, trade and integration agenda.
Yes, yes. So fingers crossed, the politicians will keep to get it right and get the implementation going.
I think I'm the pessimist here, and I want to take it from the last point that Bana raised around the role of the politicians. And whereas it's a very good sign, it's extremely important for us to get going that the politicians are on board. But from a sustainability perspective, it has to be we have to have full private sector buy-in and led as much as possible by the private sector. But I've said this before, and I'll repeat it at the risk of it rhyming. It has to be understood as a marathon and not a sprint. The role of politicians and the whole CFTA process is what will be both its success and its downfall. If for any one reason, tomorrow in the DRC, with a huge coalition that we can see brewing with the return of Bemba and that coalition that they're making, if at the next election things change, they're more likely to come and say, those are Tshisekedi's issues and he's undoing. If something major happens in 2021 in Kenya, you know, there's a high likelihood that you know, the new guard may come up and say that, oh, you know, those were the positions of Kenyatta.
So it should outlive, systems should outlive.
And the only way it is going to outlive it is if you have the full buy-in of the private sector and it is run by the private sector.
Absolutely.
And back to the issue around the East African community. The survival of the East African community rests significantly on the empowerment of the East African Business Council. Because that one is a constant. The community heads and all these organizations will continue fighting. It's not going to end with Ngoga and all these other problems that they have. It will continue going on for eternity. The strength and survival of all these business-related initiatives rests.
We're following the show on social media. And the first one is from Deojabo, who says, the launch of AFCFTA is interesting. Would be interested to hear your analysis on what's next and what Rwandans need to do to benefit from this. So he wants a sort of more contextualized, localized, practical answer. But did you have something to say? Because we have less than 3 minutes to
very quickly. One, I think it will be very important to strengthen the institutions that are in charge of the CFTA, because if we take lessons like from the EU, you have the Commission who is concerned with the day-to-day running of the EU affairs. So whether that institution is actually empowered and independent enough and left to do what it has to do to avoid, you know, because currently, I mean, if you look at East Africa, for every trade issue, you have a head of state getting on the plane, you know. The other day we had the gift of peacocks, you know. You know, it on the face of it, yes, there was, but it was really about trade, you know. So minimizing, you know, the need for our heads of state to be flying in to resolve trade issues, I think will be critical.
Very critical. Very quickly, we are coming to the end of the show. In a sentence or two, what can Rwandans do to benefit from this? Very brief.
Very quickly. So I think one thing people need to tap into is, we've talked about this on the square, and we'll talk about it again. Coming back to what you said, COMESA is the best case scenario. One thing COMESA benefited from that, again, the East African community has not been able to do, because the East African Community Business Council has not been empowered, is COMESA is a body in itself to manage that regional trade be done in that aspect. Now, how Rwandans can tap into that is through economic specialization. We can actually not just export our products, but we can also export our skills. So I think for me, that is the Rwandans can actually look for opportunities outside the country to specialize and say, we are really good at tourism, for example, and we are skilled in this, and let's look for employment beyond across the continent in areas where there could be gaps.
I like that, and I hope that's the person who asked, you know, what Rwandans can do. I hope Ephraim answered your question. Unfortunately, we have, I'm even like rushing my words. We've come to the end of the show. Thank you for watching us. Charles, Brenna, Ephraim, always a pleasure having you. To our viewers, thank you for joining us. I'd like to thank our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee. Please stay tuned for next week's show, and have a good evening.